In the heart of Yunnan province, nestled among winding rivers and lush green mountains, lies a quiet village named Nanmen. A place where time seems to stand still, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Yet beneath this serene surface, a dark secret was hiding, one that would shatter the peace forever. For years, this village remained unsuspecting of the horror lurking within its borders. Zhang Yongming, a man with a chilling past, lived quietly among his neighbors, blending seamlessly into their daily lives. But Zhang was no ordinary man. Behind his unassuming facade hid a brutal serial killer whose crimes would send shockwaves through the nation. His reign of terror would last from 2008 to 2012, leaving dozens dead. What made Zhang Yongming especially terrifying was not only his acts of violence but his extraordinary cunning. He was a man who meticulously planned his crimes, choosing victims with precision and disposing of evidence with chilling efficiency. Local villagers whispered stories of people who simply vanished without a trace. Families grew fearful, but no one could have imagined the horrifying truth concealed behind the calm countryside. Zhang's victims were primarily young men, strong, healthy individuals who, one by one, disappeared mysteriously. The silence of the community was broken only by the growing number of missing person reports. Authorities initially dismissed the disappearances as typical rural migration or personal choices. But as the numbers rose and rumors intensified, suspicions grew, yet no one could pinpoint the culprit. How could one man operate for years in such a small community without arousing suspicion? How did Zhang manage to evade the watchful eyes of law enforcement while committing acts so horrific? The answers lay buried beneath layers of deception, silence, and fear. Zhang Yongming was not only a killer, he was a master of disguise and psychological manipulation. As we delve deeper into the chilling story of Zhang Yongming, one question remains: how does a monster live among us unnoticed for so long? Zhang Yongming was born in 1956, growing up in a time and place marked by hardship and upheaval. Early signs of a troubled mind went unnoticed in the rural landscape where survival was the primary concern. His first crime shocked the nation. Convicted of murder in 1979, Zhang was sentenced to death. Yet, through legal appeals and a period of reform, his sentence was reduced, and he was released in 1997. This early brush with death did not deter him. Instead, it seemed to deepen his darkness, perhaps sharpening his understanding of fear, control, and the fragility of life. Zhang's ability to live unnoticed among villagers after his release suggests a complex psychological profile, one capable of compartmentalization and deception. He hid in plain sight, masking his true nature behind a facade of normalcy. His crimes reveal a predator who understood the psychology of fear and control. The way he selected victims, isolated young men, indicates a calculated method to avoid immediate detection. Zhang's psychological manipulation extended beyond his victims to the community itself. The silence and fear that gripped the village served his purpose, delaying investigation and allowing him to operate unchecked. From a logical perspective, Zhang's ability to evade law enforcement for years highlights not just intelligence but a cold mastery of social dynamics and investigative psychology. His previous incarceration may have ironically equipped him with insights into police procedures and investigative weaknesses, enabling him to stay one step ahead. Psychologically, Zhang represents a rare combination of cold calculation and primal violence, traits that allowed him to both plan methodically and commit acts of unspeakable brutality. Understanding Zhang Yongming's mind is key to unraveling how such a monster can live undetected and what it tells us about the darkness that can dwell within humanity. Between 2008 and 2012, the quiet village of Nanmen was shaken by a string of mysterious disappearances. Young men, full of life and promise, vanished without explanation. At first, the villagers thought these were routine cases of migration to the cities or family disputes. But as the numbers grew, a chilling unease settled over the community. The disappearances were no longer random, something dark was unfolding. Most of the missing were strong, solitary individuals who often worked in the fields or traveled alone. Their absence created a haunting silence that spread through the village like a slow poison. Families clung desperately to hope, but the community's collective fear grew with each passing day. Whispers of suspicion floated in the air, yet no one dared voice the growing dread. Local authorities initially dismissed the disappearances as typical rural phenomena, attributing them to work or family reasons. But the families knew better. They reported strange noises in the night, glimpses of unfamiliar figures near the forest edge, and unsettling activity around Zhang Yongming's home, a solitary house on the outskirts of Nanmen. Fear gripped the village, transforming neighbors into strangers. The fabric of community unraveled as suspicion and silence took hold. Zhang, who appeared as an ordinary man by day, was both feared and avoided. The villagers' reluctance to confront him openly only deepened the shadow cast over Nanmen. Behind closed doors, Zhang's home concealed unspeakable horrors. It was there that victims were brought, silenced, and dismembered. The brutal acts committed within those walls were shielded from the village's watchful eyes, a grim secret festering in the heart of Nanmen. This dark period marked the apex of Zhang's killing spree. His mastery of fear extended beyond his victims to dominate the village itself, using silence and terror as weapons to keep suspicion at bay. Despite the growing unease, it would take years before investigators pieced together the truth. Zhang's ability to manipulate social dynamics and hide evidence allowed him to remain free, continuing his reign of terror undetected. The village of Nanmen was a silent witness to one of China's most chilling serial killer cases, a stark reminder of how darkness can thrive in the most unlikely places. What forces allowed Zhang Yongming to operate with such impunity? How did the collective fear and silence of a community become his greatest allies? These questions would haunt the investigation and the villagers for years to come. As the pieces of this grim puzzle slowly emerged, the world would come to know the terrifying extent of Zhang Yongming's crimes and the darkness hidden beneath the surface of a peaceful village. Zhang Yongming's method of killing was as calculated as it was brutal. Unlike many impulsive killers, Zhang relied on quiet control and meticulous planning. He preferred to strangle his victims, using either his hands or a length of rope, ensuring a swift yet suffocating death. This choice minimized noise and resistance, allowing him to operate with chilling efficiency deep within the isolated forests surrounding Nanmen. After the murders, Zhang did not simply abandon his victims. Instead, he transported the bodies back to his secluded home, where he engaged in gruesome acts of dismemberment and, according to some reports, cannibalism. This level of depravity not only signifies a deeply disturbed mind but also an intent to destroy any trace of his crimes, effectively erasing evidence that could link him to the murders. Zhang's psychological profile reveals a man driven by more than just physical urges. His actions suggest a desire for dominance and control, extending beyond the act of killing itself. The torture, dismemberment, and possible consumption of victims point to ritualistic behavior, a dark compulsion to exert absolute power over life and death. His choice of victims was also strategic. By targeting young men who were often isolated for work or personal reasons, Zhang ensured minimal witnesses and delayed discovery. The pattern of disappearances seemed random to outsiders, masking the deliberate selection behind a veil of chance. Moreover, Zhang's ability to live among the villagers without raising suspicion underscores his mastery of psychological manipulation. He played the role of the quiet, unassuming neighbor while harboring monstrous secrets, deceiving even those closest to him. This duality, a hallmark of psychopathy, enabled him to evade detection for years. From an investigative standpoint, Zhang's methods presented enormous challenges. His killings left little forensic evidence, and his secluded location hindered search efforts. Police had to rely on painstaking detective work, piecing together scattered clues while navigating a community gripped by fear and silence. Despite these obstacles, persistent investigation gradually unveiled Zhang's gruesome secrets. His arrest in 2012 was the culmination of years of surveillance, informant tips, and forensic breakthroughs, bringing an end to his reign of terror. Zhang's case stands as a stark reminder of the depths of human depravity and the resilience of justice. It challenges us to understand not only the physical acts of violence but the psychological abyss that allows such monsters to exist among us unnoticed. How could a man so terrifying remain hidden for so long? What lessons does his story hold for law enforcement and society? These questions linger long after the final verdict. In the next scene, we will uncover the horrifying discoveries made by investigators as they piece together the fragments of Zhang Yongming's atrocities. Stay with us as the truth unfolds. The breakthrough came when police received a tip about suspicious activity around Zhang Yongming's home. Upon searching the property, they uncovered a scene straight from a nightmare: remains of victims carefully concealed, personal belongings scattered, and evidence of horrifying rituals. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigative team and the entire nation. Among the most chilling findings were the remains of Han Yao, one of the last known victims. His belongings were found alongside gruesome evidence of dismemberment. This concrete proof shattered any lingering doubts and confirmed the worst fears of the villagers. The meticulous way Zhang preserved and hid these remains suggested a disturbing relationship with his victims, one that transcended mere killing. It hinted at an obsession, a twisted sense of possession and control that extended beyond death itself. Investigators also uncovered journals and notes revealing Zhang's warped thoughts, his justifications, and the chilling calm with which he planned each murder. These writings provided crucial insight into his psyche and the methodical nature of his crimes. The evidence left little room for doubt. Zhang Yongming was not only a cold-blooded killer but also a calculating predator who derived a dark satisfaction from his acts, using his victims as objects in a horrifying game only he understood. The scale of his crimes became clear: dozens of victims, each story a tragedy, each disappearance a piece of a sinister puzzle. The community, once silent, now faced the brutal reality that the horror had been close all along. For the investigators, this discovery was both a breakthrough and a burden. The grim task of identifying victims, gathering evidence, and piecing together a timeline was daunting but necessary to bring justice and closure. The case also exposed the limitations of initial investigative efforts and the devastating cost of delayed action. Zhang's ability to continue his spree for years raised critical questions about rural law enforcement and community vigilance. As the pieces fell into place, the full horror of Zhang Yongming's crimes became undeniable, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can thrive in silence and neglect. In the next scene, we explore the long and arduous investigation that finally brought Zhang to justice, revealing the challenges and triumphs of those determined to end his terror. The investigation into Zhang Yongming's crimes stretched over more than 20 grueling days. Law enforcement agencies faced a labyrinth of challenges: limited resources, scarce forensic technology, and the daunting task of sifting through years of silence and suspicion in the village. Every lead had to be carefully verified, and every clue painstakingly pieced together to form a coherent narrative of Zhang's horrific acts. Initial investigative missteps added to the complexity. The rural setting, combined with cultural norms that discouraged questioning neighbors, slowed the collection of crucial evidence. Early reports of missing persons were often dismissed or attributed to migration, allowing Zhang to operate undetected longer than he should have. However, relentless determination by a core team of detectives eventually turned the tide. They employed emerging forensic methods, leveraged witness testimonies, and collaborated across jurisdictions, demonstrating the importance of coordinated efforts in tackling complex serial crimes. Psychological profiling played a key role in narrowing down suspects. By analyzing the nature of the crimes, victim profiles, and behavioral patterns, profilers painted a picture of a manipulative, cold, and highly intelligent offender who was deeply embedded in the community. The investigation also revealed systemic challenges: underfunded rural law enforcement, limited training in handling serial crimes, and societal stigma around reporting disappearances, all factors that allowed Zhang's spree to continue for years. Despite these obstacles, perseverance paid off. Breakthroughs came when forensics identified DNA traces linking Zhang to multiple victims. The mounting evidence led to his arrest, a moment that finally ended the terror that had gripped Nanmen for so long. The case prompted national reflection on rural crime prevention and law enforcement modernization. It highlighted the critical need for community awareness, better investigative tools, and support systems to prevent similar tragedies. For the families of the victims, the arrest brought a measure of relief, though the scars of loss and trauma would never fully heal. The community of Nanmen began a slow process of healing, grappling with the betrayal that had existed in their midst. Zhang Yongming's case remains a haunting example of how darkness can fester unnoticed and the vital importance of vigilance, both from authorities and communities. It serves as a solemn warning against complacency. In our final scene, we will explore the verdict, sentencing, and lasting impact of Zhang Yongming's crimes on Chinese society. Stay with us as we conclude this chilling journey. After months of painstaking investigation, Zhang Yongming stood trial before the Chinese courts. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensic data, witness testimonies, and his own chilling confessions laid bare the full extent of his brutal crimes. The courtroom was tense, filled with the heavy weight of grief and justice in the air. The prosecution detailed each atrocity with haunting clarity, painting a portrait of a man who had operated with cold calculation and ruthless intent. Zhang's defense was sparse, his silence speaking volumes about the depth of his guilt. After deliberation, the court sentenced Zhang Yongming to death. The sentence was carried out on January 10, 2013, marking a grim end to a chapter of terror that had haunted Nanmen for years. The verdict brought a degree of closure to the victims' families, though the wounds left behind could never truly heal. The community was left to grapple with the betrayal of trust and the darkness that had festered in their midst. Zhang's case sparked national conversation about rural crime prevention, mental health awareness, and the need for improved investigative resources in isolated regions. It exposed vulnerabilities that authorities vowed to address. Forensic science advanced as a direct response to the challenges posed by Zhang's case, leading to better protocols in evidence collection and crime scene analysis in rural China. The psychological profile of Zhang Yongming has since been studied extensively, providing insight into the mind of a calculated serial killer who blended seamlessly into society while committing unspeakable acts. His story serves as a sobering reminder that evil can wear a familiar face, hiding in plain sight. It challenges communities to remain vigilant and compassionate, balancing trust with awareness. As we close this chapter, we honor the memory of the victims and acknowledge the tireless efforts of those who pursued justice against overwhelming odds. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the dark heart of one of China's most notorious serial killer cases. To learn more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe.